everyone, and welcome to Playwright, a podcast about creating and sharing new ways to play. My name is Ryan Hamann, also known as H.
And I'm Ryan Quintal, also known as Q.
Q, I've been playing quite a bit of Spider-Man on the PlayStation 4 recently, and just out of curiosity, since Marvel seems to intend to keep this streak of high quality, well, I guess a one-game streak so far, but they want to continue making high-quality video games based on their Marvel superheroes. If you had the executive decision to create a Marvel video game and basically tell your own story with one of the pre-existing characters, what direction would you choose to take it in?
I mean, the easy answer out the gate, Spider-Man, I think, is probably one of my favorite Marvel heroes, but I think the easy answer for me is Wolverine. I think I liked the last Wolverine game when they attempted to do
Wolverine Origins?
I think so. With the kind of
a
crazy
character action type game.
Yeah, he kind of gets all bloodied up and heals and stuff. Mm-hmm. But I think that they could do a lot if they took Wolverine and did interesting things with time and year and passage of time, or they set him in kind of the turn of the century Civil War Japan era. That could be a very cool Wolverine game.
Well, it's like Peter Molyneux directing. You'd be able to have a Wolverine plant an acorn and then watch it grow into a tree in a later point in the game.
Yeah, that would be really cool. And then of course see old enemies, die of old age, even if you spared them.
Yeah, that's right. Well, you got that a little bit in Metal Gear Solid 3, so it's not entirely unbroached territory.
You just have to wait for them to die, though, over in real time, just like Kojima intended. How about you? What character would you? I'm jealous, by the way. I don't have my PS4 here with me when I moved. I sold it of fear of cockroaches being in my PlayStation 4. True story. We can get into that some other time. But
that's fair.
Who would you pick?
I think I would set a Ghost Rider story in like New Mexico, where he's kind of patrolling like a southwestern type of town and kind of has to keep the law and order, kind of like a modern Red Dead type story, maybe pushing against some of the awful border patrol people or something, just whatever kind of like local crime you'd expect to see in New Mexico, just somewhere new, interesting hero with like a kind of cool identity. And, they can even play into like the Dia de los Muertos type of Mexican tradition of skeletons and everything. So yeah, I'd do a cool Ghost Rider game, I think.
I could see you doing something. We should just save these for our main pitches now. I know we did this, but one of the things I was thinking in that little idea there, it would be really cool to add in those sort of Mad Maxian elements mixed with supernatural powers for your motorcycle.
I like the idea of Ghost Rider kind of turning anything that he rides into this kind of hell machine with all the fire and chains and everything.
Yeah.
And you kind of got a sense of that in the second Ghost Rider movie, I think it was. The second Nicolas Cage Ghost Rider film, which is a crazy phrase to say. But it would be kind of neat to be able to, almost like kind of capturing a horse in Red Dead, to take any kind of beater car or motorcycle or construction equipment or whatever and turn it into this like amazing weapon, this hell machine.
Yeah, I love it.
Well, I think that about wraps it up for us today. So
perfect.
Let's get to some actual video game pitches. I think you're first today. So what would you like to pitch?
I've got something simple, and it might be light on the specific gameplay stuff, so I'm hoping we suss it out together. I want to pitch Factorio meets Astroneer meets Wall-E, a kind of maybe...
Okay, stop for a minute. So we're having some connection problems with our Discord, And when you said Wall-E, it sounded exactly like he says it in the movie.
Perfect. Wall-E.
All right, keep going.
I love playing the video game Astroneer because it simulates the feeling of, and Factorio, because it simulates the feeling of landing in a wide open space that you have to kind of mold and turn into something useful for yourself. And Wall-E, I thought, was a great way of symbolizing that in kind of a environmental / economic kind of way. So a game where you drop in, you're not necessarily Wall-E. You can be any sort of small person, robot, whatever you like. And a world is just filled with junk. It's filled with metal and scrap and maybe interesting objects. And you can take scrap and turn it into cubes and Minecraft style, stack these cubes. Maybe you find things like wires and gears, and you're able to make some kind of machines with it. But I don't want to get too in the weeds. Let's take it from there and see what we can do.
We've got 10 minutes to get into the weeds, so let's start that now. You mentioned that there's some level of using what's in the environment to kind of build what you need. How developed are the resources that are around you? How readily available are machine parts versus things that you have to craft yourself? And how much hands-on do you get to do with the crafting?
So my initial thought is that you have access to kind of like maybe raw materials, but you don't have the ability to refine them so much. You can just kind of stack them. And I love the idea of finding maybe wires or something to electrify cubes and get your sort of perhaps a redstone-like functionality from Minecraft in there.
What scale of machines do you see people building? Is this something that you can function like a Banjo-Kazooie nuts and bolts where you can just make these big fantastic contraptions, or is this very kind of grounded in some level of reality?
Wow, I haven't thought about that game in a while. I love bringing in the Banjo. Big surprise, Ryan likes another like build-it-yourself construction sort of open-ended thing. Banjo-Kazooie type mechanics would be very fun, and I even love the aesthetic of the kind of patchwork blocks that game had. I do think that there should be, very much like a Minecraft or an Astroneer, a large aspect of the game is just kind of digging through and potentially sorting piles of trash. So maybe something that starts off, a planet that starts off looking like a desert almost, just heaps and heaps of trash flowing into each other, maybe ends up looking like an impossible city as you find different ways to get booster packs and be able to lift yourself up and build higher and higher.
We've dropped the name a few times, but I don't know if everyone's going to be familiar with Astroneer. Why don't you introduce that to the listeners?
Sure. So in Astroneer, you play an astronaut, big surprise, who kind of launches from a capsule and lands on a randomly generated planet within certain parameters. And you have two tools, or one tool that does kind of three things. It can dig into terrain, very freeform style, almost like you're painting in 3D brushstrokes. You can add to the terrain by kind of holding down a button, and of course it'll grow and you can do all sorts of crazy organic shapes. But the point of the game is mostly to dig and get to the subsurface layers of a planet, find resources, and get a base constructed with ever-growing levels of complexity. Of course, you get into things like power management, you can build vehicles and the whole thing. But what I think is interesting more than what Factorio, which is another game in a similar vein, mostly about automation of machines. What those two games simulate is kind of the idea of a singular base that is being built and expanded and maybe even potentially defended in the case of Factorio. I think it could be just as interesting, albeit maybe a little less, typical video game progression, to decentralize that, turn the whole world into different spaces and different moments. Maybe you're able to construct a robot that does some level of trash hoarding or management for you, or even sorting for you. So you have one side of a planet that's these hulking Goliaths you've constructed that are just sort of slowly moving things around until they, can't move anymore. They break down very easy, that sort of thing.
So in a way, this is kind of a society simulator as well, because you're kind of managing these societies of robots, of automated machines.
Yeah, yeah. And especially if there were ways to give them personalities. I like the idea of personality being imbued maybe entirely through aesthetics. You have a machine that does a thing, but the power of, giving it a simple pair of big googly eyes or a smile, and it changes the whole feeling and facade of the creature.
So one of the interesting things that I like to balance in RPGs is when you have a main character or a character that's going to be with you throughout the entire quest, I usually drop all of my best equipment on them and let everyone else kind of fight for whatever's left. Because, it's economically is the best decision. This is going to have the highest payoff because this is your main character. In this instance where you brought up WALL-E, there was a lot of like a robot cannibalism in that movie where he would take pieces off of other robots and kind of append them to himself. Maybe there's a level of are building your own body or exosuit out of the same materials that you use to create your robot companions, and you have to kind of choose, do I want to use the best things to make the automation process a bit faster and make myself a bit more money? Or do I want to, make my own body better, make it stronger or faster or able to jump higher or whatever, and really change the way that the game is played on a personal level?
That's really cool. And if you went that route of continuous self-improvement, you could literally use the leftovers on your army or the civilization of robots that you have that are assisting you with menial tasks.
Yeah, or you can use the best ones on your most advanced machines and really let them do all the work for you, so you don't really need, if you put all your best equipment on the helper robots, then you can just kind of sit back and kick back, let them do all the work, and you'll be just fine. Let them defend you in the case of attackers or something like that.
I love the idea of landing on these planets, and as you dig and organize these giant mounds of trash, maybe you do it with, a few friends. It's the type of game that you just kind of share a beer over and just talk about your day as you're slowly sorting cubes of metal. But you do that, and then all the while, every planet you are at, or maybe you can even eventually leave a planet like you can in these other couple examples I cited earlier, and each planet has different types of technology and found objects that can be very mundane, right, to our society now, but something as simple as an MP3 player, as we see in something like WALL-E, can go a very long way of making your game very interesting.
Obviously, in ruins of a society, you can hide a lot of lore and a lot of story in there. Do you have any inklings for where you would want the story to go?
No, I think that maybe, WALL-E goes for very direct, like humans got fat and lazy and the environment went to pot. I think that maybe we could treat all these planets in space akin to the actual giant floating trash island that's on Earth now. I guess they say, last time I checked, was like the size of Texas, and it's just in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean somewhere. If humans do one day colonize space, we're going to make very large amounts of trash, and I imagine that we'll need not trash islands, but trash planets to handle it all. So maybe you're just, mindlessly sorting one of these trash planets, and maybe through this lore that we've kind of brought into it, you find out it's not so uninhabited or something.
So maybe there's something in the core of these planets, some reason to dig down into it. Trash planets, although trash is unique like sand is all pretty much the same stuff. You know, you can pick up sand from one end of the beach and pretty much have seen all of it. But trash, like every piece of it is unique. But it would be interesting if there was some sort of a drive to always go deeper. And I don't know what would make that make sense from like a story world building perspective.
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I don't think we have to necessarily, if you dig down, you're going to necessarily hit Earth or or crust even. Like maybe this was a small asteroid that has just slowly gained mass until it is planet size. So you have a lot of layers of trash. And then, right, the deeper the layers of trash, you almost get like a tree effect where you're going earlier and earlier into a civilization's tool set in history. You could be potentially uncovering by the end like really primitive tools and stuff. And I know that maybe that seems counterproductive, but and maybe of course you could do the opposite where like, you know, the civilization had been destroyed once before and you're actually on like Earth 5 and you're getting like Earth's 1, 2, and 3's junk, and you see how things have progressed through those ages.
That's interesting. Well, let's stop there. Let's call it a day, and let's come up with a name for it.
Oh, man.
I know you dropped the term garbage planet or trash planet a couple times, which I really liked.
Yeah, I think garbage planet is pretty good.
I mean, essentially, that's what Katamari's are.
Yeah, that's right. Only this isn't getting rolled up. This is getting
space.
Beautifully stacked and very neatly arranged.
Let's move into my pitch today. What I have is a VR first-person shooter, which is something that's been kind of popular lately. It's a multiplayer first-person shooter in VR, but instead of regenerating health automatically, you have to surgically remove the bullets from your own body. And so...
Awesome.
So I'm thinking it's not something where people can take a lot of hits, and maybe there's some sort of a mechanism to make sure that people don't have like rapid fire guns that just lodge 20 bullets in you. Like maybe it's like a Revolutionary War rules where you have to spend a long time reloading after every shot, but I want to have to in VR dig into my own body and pull out the bullets to recover. So starting the clock.
This is great. This is great. There's so many times in movies where there's a shootout and a giant chunk of the shootout takes place with one or more of the characters just in cover, badly wounded and, you know, slowly reloading a gun with a very shaky hand. Mm-hmm. And I love being able to simulate this moment. In terms of digging bullets into yourself, what kind of rules are we thinking? Are we going to go straight up operation on this piece or what?
So I think essentially your life is managed by your like blood level. And so as you, if a bullet is in you, you're constantly bleeding and you're constantly losing health. And so as you take out your surgical kit, like Metal Gear Solid 3 style, you would, you'd have your knife, which you could use to get in there and kind of open up the wound, and your, tweezers to take the bullet out. And then all of that would make you bleed more because you're actively agitating the wound. But once you get it patched up, then you'll be good to go. And so, yeah, it kind of just curtails the bleeding. And maybe there's a slow recovery over time if you're not bleeding anywhere. But if you do have a bullet in you, then it's pretty imperative to get to a spot of shelter and get it out as quickly as you can anyways.
Okay, cool. So selfishly, I don't know if this is at all could be part of it, but I think one thing that would be interesting to me, the ability to, if other players have like died on the battlefield, or if there are potentially computer controlled enemies that are also somewhere around, that you could maybe hook yourself up to one and like siphon some blood.
That's interesting. I don't know if that works like in a real world setting. I know there are like blood types and everything, but if you did know that somebody else was your blood type, if you could just like give yourself a battlefield transfusion.
Yeah, like
that's kind of interesting though.
You kind of like pick up their body, throw it up on like a table or something, and as long as you're under the table you're relatively exposed, right? But you can kind of very quickly stave off the inevitable if you feel like you're not going to have the time to kind of dig stuff out. Although I guess you'd need time for the transfusion. It would have to be faster to transfuse than to dig out bullets, right?
Yeah, right.
Or maybe you need to have a transfusion underway while you're digging out bullets, right? There's the true mess.
Yeah, there you go. And so, yeah, that would be kind of an interesting strategic way of choosing a place to perform this self-operation, to choose somewhere behind cover where you're safe from enemies, but also near a body, or you can drag a body somewhere. This could also work in a single player mode. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. You just build this into the story. It would really fit well in something like The Last of Us. But, I like this as kind of an original first-person shooter type of scenario.
I'm trying to think if there is other stuff that, I don't know if it's too far into the medical field or what, but the idea of adding in actual like medical treatment into the layer of first person shooter is so fun to me. Mm-hmm. I'm trying to think if there's something where like your gun or something has a monitor of your heart rate and there's no just like straight up health meter in the game. Instead you have like an auditory kind of cue as to how much blood you might have.
That makes sense. And then with the visual signifiers as well, kind of reinforcing that, like you'd get around the blood around the edges of the screen in a lot of first-person shooters.
So let's say you're taking these bullets out of you. Like, how quickly is that kind of operation? Because you got to take them out, and then you got to, sew yourself up?
So I'm thinking it's a simplified process, but it's still a little involved. I understand that, like, for a multiplayer game especially, and for an action that you'll have to repeat many times, I don't want it to take too long, because then it would be just a real stop and go, real long rounds. But, I'm thinking I want people to have to make the choice. Do I just power through it while my health ticks down and try to kill the enemy with a headshot or something? Or do I take the time in the middle of a firefight to find a safe place where he's not going to be able to get to me anytime soon and try to patch myself up quickly? And even if I do kind of a crappy job, even if I just like bandage myself up with the bullet still inside, it slows down the degeneration long enough to at least survive the rest of the firefight. And then I can really attend to myself. So I want these types of decisions to be made without having to bog down every minute of the experience.
Okay, so why don't we add in addition to being able to do this serious surgery, serious in total quotations there, maybe we could do something where if you are in this gunfight, let's say it's reasonably slow paced, you could also be, if it's in a domestic setting, or depending on the setting, you could find things, like if it's in a hardware store, you can duct tape yourself. And kind of have all these really nasty ways of like duct taping yourself, like just makes the blood loss like slow to a trickle, but you're like still losing. All right. So if you find all these things, you potentially can slow down or stave off and like keep yourself in the fight for an extra second longer. Because I assume like if this is going to this level of detail, can I just like shoot someone in the head and win?
I mean, essentially, headshots would be the preferable way to do it, but maybe if this is like a Revolutionary War type thing, maybe the guns are kind of inaccurate, which is a little unsatisfying mechanically, so I don't know about that. Maybe you have helmets or something that make headshots not super easy to perform. Now, I am not entirely sure. I haven't really got it figured out. If this was a single player thing, then essentially you just have to, because the player character is the only one who really has to be burdened by them. So all you have to do is to like place them against a lot of enemies
Maybe you could also do like introduce, I feel like this has been in one of my previous or your previous pitches where you introduce the idea of like an ambulance countdown timer of like if somebody does go down, like maybe you defeat your opponent, there is still like X amount of time before the ambulance arrives to get them, and so you have to make sure that you're alive for the end of the match. because if you're bleeding out too badly, you end up not being the victor after all.
You should also be able to patch somebody else up. If you see somebody on the battlefield really hurting or bleeding or whatever, then you should be able to sit by them and even in the middle of a firefight to take out the bullets or to patch them up and to allow them to survive longer than they would otherwise.
Oh man, can you imagine the Battlefield / Call of Duty-esque moment of 3 teammates all picking bullets out of the same person? That would be very, very good.
This kind of throws the realism, but if a bullet comes out of a person, then it becomes like more powerful if you were to load it into your own gun.
Yeah, it's
like a revenge bullet.
Oh man. Okay, cool. So you get the revenge bullet, or maybe after, if you like dig somebody's bullet out of you, just like magically, the next bullet in your gun could be like marked for them. So if you shoot them, the person who shot, let's say it's like a 4-8 player, whatever. It doesn't matter how many players it is, but if it's a large player count game, and a bullet becomes kind of like in the chamber, there's kind of like that username or something on the barrel of the gun. And you're like, okay, if I can shoot that person with this, it like is a 1-shot kill or it's 3x the damage. So if you don't like get rid of somebody, the bullets that you put in them is a risk that they can come back and get you 2x, 3x.
Yeah, there we go. That's interesting. Well, let's close out that one there. Let's surgically sew it shut and come up with a name for it.
Here I am. I'm going to just say this and you react to it. Flesh wound.
Yeah, that's not bad. I'm surprised we haven't come up with that name before at some point.
Yeah, you would think in 70 plus episodes.
Well, that's cool. I like that. Flesh wound. That'll do. And now going to our community. Actually, we don't have anything in the old Playwright inbox today. If you would like to have one of your pitches featured, then you can email us at playwrightcast.com or go to our website at playwrightcast.com/pitch and pitch your own video game idea to us, and it'll be read very soon. But today instead, we're not just going to duck out. We always like to deliver 3 pitches on each of our shows. We're going to basically be doing a creative alternate. So what we've pulled up is a list of some of the best-selling books of all time, and we're going to find one that neither of us have read or know anything about, and try to come up with what would the video game adaptation of that book be. So, Q, what have you found?
Today we have found a book by the name of Dream of the Red Chamber by somebody named Cao Xueqin, I believe. It seems like it's Chinese. Caoxueqin. Oh boy, that's even hard to spell.
Zheqin, maybe?
Okay, I believe you. How about that?
I don't know. Let's read a little bit of the description of that book, see what it's about, just to give us a little bit of direction, and we're going to turn this into the official video game of Dream of the Red Chamber. So, the novel provides a detailed episodic record of life in the 2 branches of the wealthy aristocratic Jia clan, the Ranguo house and the Ningguo house, who reside in 2 large adjacent family compounds in the capital. Their ancestors were made dukes and given imperial titles, and as the novel begins, the 2 houses are among the most illustrious families in the city. One of the clan's offspring is made a royal consort, and a lush landscaped garden is built to receive her visit. The novel describes the Jia's wealth and influence in great naturalistic detail, and charts the Jia's fall from the height of their prestige, following some 30 main characters and over 400 minor ones.
What?
Eventually, the Jia clan falls into disfavor with the emperor, and their mansions are raided and confiscated. In the novel's frame story, a sentient stone, abandoned by the goddess Nuwa when she mended the heavens aeons ago, begs a Taoist priest and a Buddhist monk to take it with them to see the world. The stone, along with a companion is given the chance to learn from the human existence and enters the mortal realm. The main character of the novel was a carefree adolescent male heir of the family, Jia Baoyu, and he was born with a magical piece of jade in his mouth. In this life, he has a special bond with the sickly cousin Lin Dayu, who shares his love of music and poetry. Baoyu, however, is predestined to marry another cousin. We've all been there.
Classic.
Zhu Baochai, whose grace and intelligence exemplify an ideal woman, which is linked on Wikipedia. I'm very curious.
Yeah, ideal woman is blue and highlighted.
But with whom he lacks an emotional connection. The romantic rivalry and friendship among the three characters against the backdrop of the family's declining fortunes form the main story of the novel. We have
a love triangle.
Arranged marriages. Yeah, we have a love triangle. We have an ideal woman.
Yeah, absolutely ideal.
We have a talking stone who is, I guess, a part of one of those.
I love the idea of two dueling houses. Like, could this be a competitive 1v1 like dynasty builder? What would you do with if you had an open world game where you're actually competing with somebody else through the world, and as you do a quest, one potentially becomes unavailable or less favorable to the second party?
So one of the things that I think makes that a bit challenging is that if this is an open world, like an Assassin's Creed type game, it would have to be kind of asynchronous in a way, or players would have to be playing at the same time.
Right.
But Assassin's Creed feels like too much of an ask to sit down and play through in one sitting, obviously. But well,
if you would just return my calls, H, then we could sync it all up.
Well, that's the thing, is that if it's a competitive thing, basically the player with the most free time is going to pull ahead pretty quickly and is going to stay ahead. That was like me and my friend in high school both got Pokemon Diamond and Pearl at the same time. And after the first couple of gyms, it was clear that I was the one with a less developed social life. And so my Pokemon were never touchable by him ever again. So, it's difficult to make it not seem like somebody's wasting their time versus, I don't know. It's a tricky balance to set.
Maybe it has to be closer to the mechanics that I see in games like Rust. And I don't play a lot of Rust, so that's good. There's a book I haven't read and a game that I don't play. I always hear my youngest brother plays Rust, and he is always talking about the fear of not being logged into a server or logging in to find that all of his stuff has been taken away and stripped away of him, which seems like it fits nicely into the fall of a house.
Yeah. What would be interesting is if you play in a single player type game, you play both houses, but it's presented so differently in the perspective of each of these houses that you think they're just two parallel stories happening on opposite ends of the world that share some sort of thematic likenesses. And it's not until later in the game where the stories really converge that you realize that all of the plotting that you've been doing against these other houses was actually you plotting against the other players or the other characters that you've been playing as. And so it's kind of heartbreaking in that way, because this amazing assassination that you set up actually took out your favorite character from the other storyline.
Oh, wow. That's cool. That's cool. I know that we don't necessarily want to go into the asynchronous multiplayer stuff, but I also love the idea of having to take down somebody else's house, but also romance one of their characters.
That's a cool dynamic as well.
Yeah, could you potentially win, but win in such a gracious and honorable way that the person still agrees to marry you?
Or it's kind of about you want to take over not only the house, but also all the servants and the villages, the peasants or whatever they're ruling over. And so you can't come in as a conqueror. You have to come in at least somewhat gracefully to not have a peasant revolt as soon as you take power.
Okay, so quick real-time follow-up, I am happy to report that clicking on Ideal Woman took me to, unless you've already done this and already know, an article that's titled Women in Ancient and Imperial China. So no, Wikipedia does not have some statement of fact about what the ideal woman is, just what it was documented of being in ancient and imperial China.
So many citations needed.
Yeah. Asterisk. Right, we need to have one of the main characters on one side be this kind of stone come to life man.
Okay, yeah.
Who knows little of emotion, but ends up falling for someone who maybe is in this other house. At the same time, you're this kind of operative trying to take down that house, yet that house, how does...
Well, no, I don't think the talking stone is one of the characters in this story. I think that's presented as like a frame story, like the stone is telling the story or observing it happening, which if we do decide to do like a deceptive split of, two stories in parallel that we don't know intersect that actually do, then maybe that's like a interesting way to do it, to have a narrator telling both stories. And so, naturally, since it's it could be an unreliable narrator, or it could just be told in different ways, it would make sense to also have a different visual presentation because it's being imagined by the people that he's speaking to.
Yes. If this all came down to like plotting and executing some major assassination mission, or like every time you're toggling between each house, you are realizing that like something has gone awry while you're away. So it seems like it's a game of like triage and revenge until eventually you realize that somehow mechanically you have to you have to hide from the player that you're doing it to yourself, and then show the cards kind of by the end.
I like that. I mean, obviously it's a trick that only really works once, but maybe in retrospect, in future playthroughs, you see it earlier, and it still doesn't like ruin the magic of it. Kind of like the twist in BioShock, where if you know what it is going into it, you can see it planted throughout and seeded.
Okay, all right. Here's the pitch, baby. Journey, great game. We all love Journey. Journey is a game, here we go, spoilers for Journey, that never suggests to you that it's multiplayer until eventually it tells you that it was multiplayer, right? What if this game attempts to do the opposite of that? So you choose like a house, and it tells you, oh, there's this many people online, there's this many millions of people in it, maybe the numbers look about even, and you're constantly logging in and waging this war, making slow and steady gains against the other house, until eventually you, at some point, it exposes to you that it was never some sort of massive multiplayer online thing. Instead, it was just showing you these numbers, and you were really combating yourself the whole time, or something like that.
Yeah, I like that. A fake multiplayer that's actually single player.
I mean, it's I don't know if anybody's done it.
Yeah, you just put like other character name or other player names over the different characters in the other house, and then all of a sudden you'll see it and you'll just charge in and start killing,
Yeah, and I mean, this is almost a trick that Forza Horizon like executes very well, right? Where they tell us it's based off of, data and people's behavior, but for all we know, you just, scoured Xbox's network, put up a bunch of usernames, and made it the same old reframed AI that now makes it seem more interesting or intelligent than before. I'm sure that's not what they're doing, but that could be what this game attempts to do. One of the things that you'd have to do is like, once you choose your house, like at the end of the game or credits, like it shows you like the hours, like every time you log in, it's actually randomly switching which house you are without communicating it to you. And then by the end of the game, it shows you how many hours you kind of played against yourself and which house you made more successful against the other. Like you're promised something up front. Like if one house reaches like 80% of the global win rate or something. And so like you are like constantly being pit against yourself until one side ends up triumphing enough times over the other.
Now, there has to be kind of stretches of story in between these matches as well. You know, something to kind of contextualize and to give the battles meaning.
I wonder if you could do some of that through some sort of progression. There's a Call of Duty-esque player level, and as you hit sort of player level thresholds that you get new videos that play or new pieces of lore that you get access to that kind of allow you to read it. Like, there's so many people, I think, especially the hunter killer gamer type, that never reads any lore. I love the idea of making it very obvious what's happening through the lore and kind of the people that are looking to plow through and just beat the other team and be competitive are the ones that like never realize the futility of the effort.
Well, that's cool. And it is very circular. Let's close that out there. And I think, you know, it came with a name, Dream of the Red Chamber. That's still like one of the coolest titles that I've ever heard of. So I'm not fancying
when I said
it.
You were like, what is that?
Yeah, very cool. That is that. As with every week where we don't have anything in the inbox, we always come up with something creative to do, but we would rather hear from one of you and hear what's on your mind and what kind of video games you can come up with. So if you in the community would like to have one of your pitches read and discussed on the show, then you can email us at playwrightcast@gmail.com. You can tweet us at playwrightcast, or you can go to playwrightcast.com/pitch. And in all of those instances, it is PLAYWRITECAST.
Hey, special shout out to our new Spotify listeners. We see you. We appreciate you. And remember, when you write in your pitches, it doesn't have to be fancy. Sometimes you can say, hey, why don't they make a sequel to Mortal Kombat Origins Sub-Zero? I agree. Why don't they do that? What happens if you smash up video games like Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racer with Persona and see what happens? Oh my God, that could be a good idea too. Never mind. TMTM copyright. And while you're writing your pitch, you can get inspired by listening to our theme song. It is by PROTODOME off the album Blue Noise, and it's the track called Hello World. I've been mixing up the order I say this lately, and it feels fresh to me now. It really does.
Just like the song every time we hear it. Well, let's go out today with a miniature pitch. Q, what are you bringing us today?
Today, I want to pitch to you a Final Fantasy VII prequel game where you play as Cloud as a bad guy during his years as a member of Soldier.
There we go. All right. Well, that'll do us for today. We'll see you next week.
Bye.